So the last two presentations, there's a lot of focus, of course, building on Bitcoin. How do you get the liquidity in, right? And the GOAT and also the Mezzo presentation talked about TradFi and institutions. So there's a problem with that. Institutions usually cannot bridge Bitcoin because institutions, corporate treasuries, hold Bitcoin because it's the safest, most decentralized asset. If they then take that Bitcoin and they send it to a bridge, which is secured by usually 60 nodes, 100 nodes, or these Bitcoin L2s, then they lose that security. And so the corporate risk managers cannot do that. They don't know. Also, they don't know how to evaluate the technical risk of going off of Bitcoin chain onto an intermediary layer. So what we've developed is a way to actually bring in institutional Bitcoin liquidity into any chain. And we actually use something called a discrete log contract, which I'm going to assume most people have never heard of. But it's actually the only smart contract that you actually have in Bitcoin L1 already. And it's not really a smart contract. I call it a dumb contract, but that name didn't stick, probably a good thing. But basically, discrete log, maybe show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of DLCs, discrete log contracts? 1, 2, okay, cool, I got about 10%, less than 10%. So discrete log contracts were invented at MIT 6 years ago by the creator of the Lightning Network, Taj, and they were implemented with Taproot 3 years ago. And so they enable basically like an if-then statement, a conditional payment statement, where there's basically, let's say the typical example given is you have Alice and Bob, and they want to make a sports bet, and they select an oracle that will determine who wins the game. And Alice and Bob both deposit Bitcoin. They pre-sign all of the conditional outcomes. So let's say outcome 1 is Alice gets all the Bitcoin, outcome 2 is Bob gets it, outcome C, maybe there's a draw, or the game didn't happen, then they get their deposits back, something like that. So they pre-sign all the conditional outputs, and then this is encoded into Bitcoin chain through Schnorr signatures, which were added 3 years ago with Taproot. And then the oracle basically, the oracle does not know who Alice and Bob are, but basically publishes a number corresponding to whatever happened, and then either Alice or Bob can grab that number and execute the transaction. So it's just an if-then statement where the condition is evaluated through an oracle off-chain. So DLCs have been around, like I said, for 6 years in theory and 3 years in kind of prototyping. But nobody had ever really built something meaningful or scalable with DLCs. There's been different attempts. We're actually the first project to implement DLCs in a very scalable way. And we do it by what we created is dlcBTC, which is a safer wrapped Bitcoin. So maybe I'll take a step back. We're just talking about bridges, of course. We're talking about custodians like BitGo for WBTC or Coinbase for CBBTC. Both of those approaches have issues. With a custodian, it's off-chain, so you don't know if the reserves are there. With a bridge, you don't know if the bridge gets hacked. What are all the ways the bridge can get hacked? You don't know. It's hard to secure a bridge. So what we've invented is something we call self-wrapping, where you lock Bitcoin with yourself using the DLC mechanism. So basically, to do that, kind of go back to my earlier case, you have Alice. Alice puts up Bitcoin and pre-signs herself as the only potential outcome. The only outcome that can come out of that DLC is that Alice gets the Bitcoin back. Basically, Alice is locking the Bitcoin with herself. And it's a theft-proof system because the Bitcoin can never go anywhere else. That's the only output path that is pre-signed. And so basically, Alice locks with herself in our system. That means there's a set of relay nodes that are running Bitcoin nodes and ETH nodes, and they each have a Bitcoin private key they use to sign an attestation. So when the Bitcoin blockchain 6 block confirmations, publishes that Alice has made that deposit, the relay nodes each just publish an attestation saying, "Yep, I see it. It's on Bitcoin. I attest to it." A threshold of those mints the dlcBTC on ETH. And that further is secured by Chainlink Proof of Reserve, who also runs a Bitcoin node and can check. And anyone can check that Bitcoin UTXO is funded. And then that mints dlcBTC on ETH or any other chain. And then basically it can use DeFi, et cetera. In this system, retail cannot. So let me take a step back, because I was talking about institutions. So institutions use this. Retail cannot mint. Why? Because if retail permissionlessly, locks Bitcoin, they get dlcBTC, they trade it away, and they can't like get it back, they could never redeem it. So what we end up with is a system very similar to USDC. We're like USDC for Bitcoin. USDC is minted by some banks like Silicon Valley Bank, Wells Fargo, et cetera. They get whitelisted, they put up dollars, mint a fungible token, retail uses that token, but it's backed by those institutions. We have that for Bitcoin. We have merchants, which is actually similar to how WBTC works, but ours is safer because of, I'll explain. But basically, we have these merchants. They, like Amber Group, FalconX, Galaxy, kind of large institutions, they each get whitelisted to self-wrap their Bitcoin, maintain self-custody, but self-wrap and mint dlcBTC. Retail can use it. And then if retail wants to redeem for Bitcoin, they go back out through the merchants and unwrap it that way. Basically, it's literally WBTC without the custodian. There's no centralized point of failure with BitGo, BitGlobal, Coinbase, Binance. That's not relevant in this system because every merchant maintains self-custody, so they can choose whichever custodian or they can build their own self-custody. Who really cares about that are large Bitcoin whales. So large Bitcoin holding institutions that, if you're sitting on a 100 million plus Bitcoin, let's say you're BlackRock, and you have ETF and you have a bunch of Bitcoin sitting there, you're not gonna wanna move that Bitcoin. You're gonna keep it in your system. But you might want to earn DeFi yields. Well, you might want to earn yields on it. And if you're going to earn yields, might as well earn DeFi yields because it's on-chain. And so that's basically, that's how basically we become a institutional liquidity provision protocol. We're live on Arbitrum, Base, and starting next week, Ethereum. We're launching then to BNB and some other chains. We can wrap to any chain. We're going to be the first wrap Bitcoin and XRPL at some point in the next few months. We can launch to Bitcoin L2s, et cetera. We're tracking 47 chains that we can bring institutional liquidity into. We're partnering with, I mentioned Amber Group, Franklin Templeton, Coinbase, large Bitcoin holders, as well as whales. And so, yeah, we've got a little bit of flyer there on the table with some of the yields that can be earned on dlcBTC. For example, we're incentivizing a curve pool so you can earn 8% plus points for depositing dlcBTC into our WBTC dlcBTC pool. We're going to be setting up a pool with cBTC on Base, setting up a pool with TBTC on ETH, yeah, basically a small group. So find me after. My colleague Day is in the back too, so find either of us with any questions. And yeah, and then I'll just end with that whole explanation is also on a recent episode of Unchained with Laura Shin from 2 weeks ago. It's a 30-minute explanation. I have a little bit more time to go into detail. So if you haven't already, check it out there. Check out the flyer, dlcBTC on Twitter, and yeah, find us after. Thanks you very much.